Who does own the moon? Let me ask you a few questions. Just raise your hand. I can't see all of you very well, but enough of you. First of all, how many think that it's not owned by anybody? Okay, it's a large number. How about it's owned by everybody? Fewer. Okay. How many think that there are valuable resources on the moon? Most of you. Okay. We'll delve into some of those questions over the next few minutes. Is this science fiction, or is this what will happen very soon? Habitats on the moon, possibly other things there too. But owning the moon, different story. It's not new. There are many people who have made claims on the moon in the past. They're not lunatics, they're people trying to make a little money. You can get on the internet today, or it's been out there for a long time, and you can buy a certificate. That certificate says you own an acre of the moon. You only have to pay about $20 for it. I went looking the other day, and the same company is actually selling Pluto for $250,000. You can buy it if you want to. But any good space lawyer will tell you that those certificates that you get are nice decorations for your wall, a nice gift for a friend, but don't try to really go up there and build a house or claim it. In fact, no nation has ever given anybody permission to buy or sell territory on the moon. And when we talk about the moon, we are also talking about other celestial bodies, be they Mars, Pluto, asteroids, or anything else that's up there that is physical. So, where are we? Well, the answer is really both. You're all right. Everybody owns the moon together, and no individual owns the moon at all. There are treaties. 50 years ago, lawyers, diplomats, scientists, engineers all got together under the auspices of a group at the United Nations called COPUOS, Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It's a place to talk about space affairs, legal, technical ones, and to draft treaties. And they were successful in drafting 5 treaties, as I mentioned, about 50 years ago in the late 1960s, early 1970s. That was the time when both the United States and the Soviet Union had successful space programs. We had the race to be first on the moon, and the US, of course, won that race, but it called for some sort of legal standards and legal principles to be discussed. And we went there, as you know, the Apollo launch, we've been there. What are we going to do about the celestial bodies? Well, both the United States and the Soviet Union brought back moon rocks. That's a fact. Who owns those moon rocks? That's a little more difficult. In the United States government said the government owns them. If you happen to have a rock in your house, someday somebody's going to come knocking at the door, representative of the government, and say, give it back. On the other hand, in Russia today, they actually auctioned off some moon rocks that they brought back. Point is, this is not a decision of an individual. It is up to the nation. And the treaties that we have go back to the master document, the Outer Space Treaty. That's a shorthand for the real title, which I think is important to focus on for a second. It is a treaty on the principles of the exploration and the use of space by states, and includes the moon and other celestial bodies. It's been signed or ratified, acceded to by nearly 130 nations of the 190 UN nations. Even Iran and North Korea in recent years have signed up for the treaty. Of course, like any international agreement, the implementation is a national thing. It's up to nations. Some abide by the rules a little better than others. The other 4 treaties I'll mention very briefly, just for completeness. There's a treaty on the rescue and return of astronauts. There's a treaty on registration, which means that each state has to tell the UN what it's put up there and how it's put up there. There's a treaty on liability, which means that if something goes wrong, if a satellite crashes into the roof of your house, the launching state, the owner of that satellite, has to pay you to make you whole, to rebuild your roof. If something happens in space, it's a fault-based liability. You have to figure out what went wrong and why. And finally, there's a Moon Agreement. Now, the Moon Agreement is more of an academic exercise than the others because it has only been signed or ratified by 20 nations, none of which are the major spacefaring nations of the United States, Russia, or China. So, what are the principles behind these treaties? Well, first of all, space is supposed to be used only for peaceful purposes. Secondly, the treaties say that space is the province of mankind and it's for the benefit of all nations. Another principle is that no weapons of mass destruction are supposed to be used in space. Another is that there's no sovereignty in space. A nation is, by law, not allowed to declare it owned by the nation, that nation. Which brings us back to the first questions and the example on the internet of this company. How can they do that? Well, they claim they're not a state. They're a company. There's a registry they set up somewhere. It's not one that's endorsed by a national government. But what they fail to talk about is the fact that there's another part of the treaty that says that each nation, each state, is responsible and ultimately liable for not only the government actions and government equipment that's up there, but for the actions of their citizens as well, and for continuous supervision of what is being done in space. So, even though nobody shut down those companies, they could be if the government wanted to enforce that principle. So let's go back to the moon for a minute. We have telescopes, and we've been there, and the way we've handled it is we've named the craters, we've named the moons. They're all given scientific names. Okay, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But is this what we want it to look like in the future, where you carve out something owned by each nation? I don't think so. That would certainly violate the treaties because of the sovereignty issues. It's also important to note that the moon is not one thing. There are more valuable parts than others up there. You have the poles, which have the ice caps and water. You've got other resources and minerals in other places. Again, going back to my question, which I will answer later, we know there are resources there. We know there are resources on other planets, even on asteroids. The question there is, are they valuable? And valuable to whom, when, and where? That's the question that hasn't truly been answered yet. They're valuable for scientific purposes. Are they valuable for commercial purposes? The next issue is that we have private activities that are going to be occurring in space. This is fairly new. What about companies? How does this interact with government actions and with the treaties? This is where we have that void. This is where we don't know how to handle it, where the drafters of the treaties 50 years ago thought about it, but they really didn't know how to handle it, and we're still wrestling nationally and internationally with that problem. And in fact, when you look at the principles and you look at the treaties, nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful. They're great ideals. But the wording is vague. You've got exceptions. You've got loopholes. For example, what is peaceful purposes? How do we define that? In the end, we usually define it as non-aggressive. But we can still take pictures of adversaries from space of the territory on Earth legally. We can operate communications, military and civilian communications from space. Those are not aggressive by that definition. What about astronauts? Astronauts in the Outer Space Treaty say it says that they're to be treated as envoys of mankind, essentially diplomats. Okay, that's fine. That was fine in the Apollo era. But what happens when we have private pilots of spacecraft in the future? Should they be treated as diplomats? I don't think so. But exactly how should we treat them? They are human beings. We still should rescue and return them, and I think that's the bottom line conclusion. But the words of the treaties are a little bit different. Then we have all these private companies. What do they want to do besides launching? There are proposals out there to mine asteroids. There are proposals to service satellites, fix satellites. It's pretty amazing. You're traveling at 17,500 miles or so, that you could take another satellite, attach it to an older satellite, wasn't built for being attached to, unscrew the fuel tank, and put new fuel in it. That's what they say they can do, and they can. These things are around the corner. They're going to happen fairly soon. There may be commercial opportunities there. And in fact, the US government, the United States, of course, being the largest spender of research and development money, government money in this world in space, also has the most advanced technology today. We're not the only one with that technology, but we're still pretty good. And we are one of the few countries of the world that really encourages private initiatives, and increasingly so over time in government policy. And in fact, as we speak, Congress is working on a new bill, that will formally grant ownership, the rights to resources obtained from asteroids or the moon or other celestial bodies to those companies. Now, that's no different really from the US government saying they owned what they took from space. And it is not technically a declaration of sovereignty over any celestial body. But this is a new concept. And I guarantee you it is going to be argued in international circles. But it is an interpretation of the treaty, not a direct violation of the treaty. So, we can prospect, we find resources on the moon. We also want to protect the footprints of the Apollo astronauts, of Neil Armstrong's and Buzz Aldrin's when they landed there. Are these world cultural sites or not? We don't have any agreements on that. We have some rules from the treaties, but what we really need is the nations that have been there. The United States, Russia, and China at the moment, and others who may want to go there, to agree that we will leave your stuff alone if you leave our stuff alone. It's not so easy. You've got environmental issues, you've got dust from the regolith just landing there. Lunar X Prize contestants get there and do things on the moon. You've got issues that we're going to have to deal with, that what we've dealt with now, up to now, may not be sufficient. So, parenthetically, I just want to add a couple of things. First of all, making money in space is not a slam dunk. We've had a number of companies in the past with great ideas, and they haven't made it. Even the so-called space tourism. It was over 10 years ago when the Google X Prize was won by a company that sent a rocket up twice within 2 weeks, piloted. But we don't have one paying customer yet for those suborbital flights. Well, every year companies say we expect to. It's difficult. There have been accidents. It's risky. It's a high upfront investment before you have paying customers. That is true not only of putting people up there, it is also true of bringing resources back. So, bottom line, it's going to be up to your generation to figure all this out. The technology will be there. Will the law be there? Will we be able to balance our international commitments with what private companies want to do, with environmental issues that are also very serious in space, and we want to allow space to be sustainable in the future, not to mess it up so that the next generation can't use it at all. Thank you.